Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. Friday, 14th August, 1942. Dear Kitty, I have deserted you for a whole month, but honestly, there is so little news here that I can't find amusing things to tell you every day. The Van Dans arrived on July 13th. We thought they were coming on the 14th, but between the 13th and 16th of July, the Germans called up people right and left, which created more and more unrest. So they played for safety. Better a day too early than a day too late. At 9:30 in the morning, we were still having breakfast. Peter arrived, the Van Dam's son, not 16 yet, a rather soft, shy, gawky youth. Can't expect much from his company. He brought his cat, Moushy, with him. Mr. and Mrs. Van Dam arrived half an hour later, and to our great amusement, she had a large potty in her hat box. I don't feel at home anywhere without my chamber, she declared. So it was the first thing to find its permanent resting place, under her divan. Mr. Van Dam did not bring his, but carried a folding tea table under his arm. From the day they arrived, we all had meals cozily together, and after 3 days it was just as if we were one large family. Naturally, the Van Dams were able to tell us a lot about the extra week they had spent in the inhabited world. Among other things, we were very interested to hear what had happened to our house and to Mr. Goudsmith. Mr. Van Dam told us, Mr. Goudsmith phoned at 9 o'clock on Monday morning and asked if I could come around. I went immediately and found G in a state of great agitation. He let me read a letter that the Franks had left behind and wanted to take the cat to the neighbors as indicated in the letter, which pleased me. Mr. G was afraid that the house would be searched, so we went through all the rooms, tidied up a bit, and cleared away the breakfast things. Suddenly, I discovered a writing pad on Mrs. Frank's desk, with an address in Maastricht written on it. Although I knew that this was done on purpose, I pretended to be very surprised and shocked, and urged Mr. G to tear up this unfortunate little piece of paper without delay. I went on pretending that I knew nothing of your disappearance all the time, but after seeing the paper, I got a brainwave. Mr. Goudsmith, I said, it suddenly dawns on me what this address may refer to. Now it all comes back to me. A high-ranking officer was in the office about 6 months ago. He appeared to be very friendly with Mr. Frank and offered to help him should the need arise. He was stationed in Maastricht. I think he must have kept his word, and somehow or other managed to get them into Belgium and then on to Switzerland. I should tell this to any friends who may inquire. Don't, of course, mention Maastricht. With these words, I left the house. Most of your friends know already, because I've been told myself several times by different people. We were highly amused at the story, and when Mr. Van Dam gave us further details, laughed still more at the way people can let their imagination run away with them. One family had seen the pair of us pass on bicycles very early in the morning, and another lady knew quite definitely that we were fetched by a military car in the middle of the night. Yours, Anne. Friday, 21st August, 1942. Dear Kitty, the entrance to our hiding place has now been properly concealed. Mr. Crowler thought it would be better to put a cupboard in front of our door, because a lot of houses are being searched for hidden bicycles. But of course it had to be a movable cupboard that can open like a door. Mr. Vossen made the whole thing. We had already let him into the secret, and he can't do enough to help. If we want to go downstairs, we have to first bend down and then jump, because the step has gone. The first 3 days we were all going about with masses of lumps on our foreheads, because we all knocked ourselves against the low doorway. Now we have nailed a cloth filled with wood wool against the top of the door. Let's see if that helps. I'm not working much at present. I'm giving myself holidays until September. Then Daddy is going to give me lessons. It's shocking how much I've forgotten already. There is little change in our life here. Mr. Van Daan and I usually manage to upset each other. It's just the opposite with Margot, whom he likes very much. Mummy sometimes cheats me just like a baby, which I can't bear. Otherwise, things are going better. I still don't like Peter anymore. He is so boring. He flops lazily on his bed half the time, does a bit of carpentry, then goes back for another snooze. What a fool! It is lovely weather, and in spite of everything, we make the most we can of it by lying on a camp bed in the attic, where the sun shines through an open window. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, 2nd September, 1942. Dear Kitty, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan have had a terrific quarrel. I've never seen anything quite like it before. Mummy and Daddy would never dream of shouting at each other. The cause was so trivial that the whole thing was a pure waste of breath. But still, everyone to his own liking. Naturally, it is very unpleasant for Peter, who has to stand by. No one takes him seriously. He is so frightfully touchy and lazy. Yesterday he was badly upset because he found that his tongue was blue instead of red. This unusual phenomenon of nature disappeared just as quickly as it had come. Today he is going about with a scarf on, as he has a stiff neck. In addition, my lord complains of lumbago. Pains around the heart, kidneys, and lungs are not unusual either. He is a real hypochondria. That's the word for such people, isn't it? It is not all honey between Mummy and Mrs. Van Daan. There is plenty of cause for unpleasantness. To give a small example, I will tell you that Mrs. Van Daan has taken all 3 of her sheets out of the common linen cupboard. She takes it for granted that Mummy's sheets will do for all of us. It will be a nasty surprise for her when she finds that Mummy has followed her good example. Also, she is thoroughly piqued that her dinner service and not ours is in use. She is always trying to find out where we have actually put our plates. They are closer than she thinks. They are in a cardboard box behind a load of junk in the attic. Our plates are ungettable as long as we are here. And a good thing, too. I always have bad luck. I smashed one of Mrs. Van Daan's soup plates into 1,000 pieces yesterday. Oh, she cried angrily. Couldn't you be careful for once? That's the last one I've got. Mr. Van Daan is all sugar to me nowadays. Long may it last. Mummy gave me another frightful sermon this morning. I can't bear them. Our ideas are completely opposite. Daddy is a darling, although he can sometimes be angry with me for 5 minutes on end. Last week we had a little interruption in our monotonous life. It was over a book about women and Peter. First, I must tell you that Margot and Peter are allowed to read nearly all the books that Mr. Kufus lends us, but the grown-ups held back this particular book on the subject of women. Peter's curiosity was aroused at once. What was it the two of them were not allowed to read in this book? He got hold of the book on the sly, while his mother was downstairs talking, and disappeared with his booty to the attic. All went well for a few days. His mother knew what he was doing, but didn't tell tales until father found out. He was very angry, took the book away, and thought that would finish the whole business. However, he had not allowed for his son's curiosity, which waxed rather than waned because of his father's attitude. Peter, determined to finish it, thought of a way to get hold of this enthralling book. In the meantime, Mrs. Van Daan had asked Mummy what she thought about it all. Mummy thought this particular book was not suitable for Margot, but she saw no harm in letting her read most books. "There is a great difference, Mrs. Van Daan," said Mummy, "between Margot and Peter. In the first place, Margot is a girl, and girls are always more grown-up than boys. Secondly, Margot has read quite a lot of serious books, and does not go in search of things that are forbidden her. And thirdly, Margot is far more developed and intelligent, shown by the fact of her being in the fourth form at school." Mrs. Van Daan agreed, but still thought it was wrong in principle to let children read books which were written for grown-ups. In the meantime, Peter had found a time of the day when no one bothered about him or the book. 7:30 in the evening. Then everyone was in the private office listening to the radio. That was when he took his treasure to the attic again. He should have been downstairs again by 8:30, but because the book was so thrilling he forgot the time, and was just coming downstairs as his father came into the room. You can imagine the consequences. With a slap and a snatch, the book lay on the table and Peter was in the attic. That's how matters stood as we sat down to table. Peter stayed upstairs. No one bothered about him, and he had to go to bed without any supper. We went on with the meal, chattering gaily, when suddenly we heard a piercing whistle. We all stopped eating and looked with pale, changed faces from one to another. Then we heard Peter's voice calling down the chimney, "I say, I'm not coming down anyway." Mr. Van Daan sprang to his feet. His napkin fell to the floor, and scarlet in the face, he shouted, "I've had enough of this." Daddy took his arm, afraid of what might happen, and the two men went together to the attic. After a good deal of resistance and stamping, Peter landed up in his room with the door closed, and we went on eating. Mrs. Van Daan wanted to save one slice of bread for the dear boy, but his father stood firm. If he doesn't apologize soon, he will have to sleep in the attic. Loud protests from the rest of us, as we thought missing supper was quite enough punishment. Besides, Peter might catch cold, and we couldn't call a doctor. Peter did not apologize. He was already in the attic. Mr. Van Daan did nothing more about it. But I noticed the next morning that Peter's bed had been slept in. Peter was back in the attic at 7 o'clock, but Daddy managed with a few friendly words to persuade him to come down again. Sour faces and obstinate silences for 3 days, and then everything went smoothly once more. Yours, Anne. Monday, 21st September 1942. Dear Kitty, today I'm going to tell you our general news. Mrs. Van Daan is unbearable. I get nothing but blow-ups from her for my continuous chatter. She is always pestering us in some way or other. This is the latest. She doesn't want to wash up the pans if there is a fragment left. instead of putting it into a glass dish. As we've always done until now, she leaves it in the pan to go bad. After the next meal, Margot sometimes has about 7 pans to wash up, and then Madame says, well, Margot, you have got a lot to do. I'm busy with Daddy working out his family tree. As we go along, he tells me little bits about everyone. It's terribly interesting. Mr. Kufus brings a few special books for me every other week. I'm thrilled with the Upterhool series. I've enjoyed the whole of Sissy Van Mark's Veld very much. And I've read Ian's Mersothied 4 times, and I still laugh about some of the ludicrous situations that arise. Term time has begun again. I'm working hard at my French and managed to pump in 5 irregular verbs per day. Peter sighs and groans over his English. A few school books have just arrived. We have a good stock of exercise books, pencils, rubbers, and labels, as I brought these with me. I sometimes listen to the Dutch news from London. Heard Prince Bernhard recently. He said that Princess Juliana is expecting a baby about next January. I think it is lovely. It surprises the others that I should be so keen on the royal family. I was being discussed, and they decided that I'm not completely stupid after all, which had the effect of making me work extra hard the next day. I certainly don't want to still be in the first form when I'm 14 or 15. Also, the fact that I'm hardly allowed to read any decent books was mentioned. Mummy is reading Hirden, Vrowen, and Nechten now, which I'm not allowed. Margot is. First, I must be more developed, like my talented sister. Then we talk about my ignorance of philosophy and psychology, about which I know nothing. Perhaps by next year I shall be wiser. I looked up these difficult words quickly. In Conan. I have just woke up to the disturbing fact that I have 1 long-sleeve dress and 3 cardigans for the winter. I've received permission from Daddy to knit a jumper of white sheep's wool. It's not very nice wool, but as long as it's warm, that's all that matters. We have some clothes deposited with friends, but unfortunately we shall not see them until after the war, that is, if they are still there then. I had just written something about Mrs. Van Daan when in she came. Slap! I closed the book. Hey, Anne, can't I just have a look? I'm afraid not. Just the last page, then? No, I'm sorry. Naturally, it gave me a frightful shock, because there was an unflattering description of her on this particular page. Yours, Anne. Friday, 25th September, 1942. Dear Kitty, yesterday evening I went upstairs and visited the Van Daans. I do so occasionally to have a chat. Sometimes it can be quite fun. Then we have some moth biscuits. The biscuit tin is kept in the wardrobe, which is full of mothballs, and drink lemonade. We talked about Peter. I told them how Peter often strokes my cheek and that I wished he wouldn't, as I don't like being pawed by boys. In the typical way parents have, they asked if I couldn't get fond of Peter, because he certainly liked me very much. I thought, oh dear, and said, oh no, imagine it. I did say that I thought Peter rather awkward, but that it was probably shyness, as many boys who haven't had much to do with girls are like that. I must say that the refuge committee of the secret annex male section is very ingenious. I'll tell you what they've done now to get news of us through. To Mr. Van Dyke, Chavy's chief representative and a friend. who has surreptitiously hidden some of our things for us. They typed a letter to a chemist in South Zealand who does business with our firm in such a way that he has to send the enclosed reply back in an addressed envelope. Daddy addressed the envelope to the office. When this envelope arrives from Zealand, the enclosed letter is taken out and is replaced by a message in Daddy's handwriting as a sign of life. Like this, Van Dyke won't become suspicious when he reads the note. They specially chose Zealand because it is so close to Belgium, and the letter could have easily been smuggled over the border. In addition, no one is allowed into Zealand without a special permit, so if they thought we were there, he couldn't try and look us up. Yours, Anne. Sunday, 27th September, 1942. Dear Kitty, just had a big bust-up with Mummy for the umpteenth time. We simply don't get on together these days, and Margot and I don't hit it off any too well either. As a rule, we don't go in for such outbursts as this in our family. Still, it's by no means always pleasant for me. Margot's and Mummy's natures are completely changed to me. I can understand my friends better than my own mother. Too bad. We often discuss post-war problems, for example, how one ought to address servants. Mrs. Van Daan had another tantrum. She is terribly moody. She keeps hiding more of her private belongings. Mummy ought to answer each Van Daan disappearance with a frank disappearance. How some people do adore bringing up other people's children in addition to their own. The Van Daans are that kind. Margot doesn't need it. She is such a goody-goody, perfection itself. But I seem to have enough mischief in me for the two of us put together. You should hear us at mealtimes, with reprimands and cheeky answers flying to and fro. Mummy and Daddy always defend me stoutly. I'd have to give up if it weren't for them, although they do tell me that I mustn't talk so much, that I must be more retiring and not poke my nose into everything. Still, I seem doomed to failure. If Daddy wasn't so patient, I'd be afraid I was going to turn out to be a terrific disappointment to my parents, and they are pretty lenient with me. If I take a small helping of some vegetable I detest and make up with potatoes, the Van Daans, and Mevrouw in particular, can't get over it, that any child should be so spoiled. Come along, Anne, have a few more vegetables, she says straight away. No, thank you, Mrs. Van Daan, I answer. I have plenty of potatoes. Vegetables are good for you. Your mother says so too. Have a few more, she says, pressing them on me until Daddy comes to my rescue. Then we have from Mrs. Van Daan. You ought to have been in our home. We were properly brought up. It's absurd that Anne's is so frightfully spoiled. I wouldn't put up with it if Anne were my daughter. These are always her first and last words. If Anne were my daughter. Thank heavens I'm not. But to come back to this upbringing business, there was a deadly silence after Mrs. Van Daan had finished speaking yesterday. Then Daddy said, I think Anne is extremely well brought up. She has learned one thing anyway, and that is to make no reply to your long sermons. As to the vegetables, look at your own plate. Mrs. Van Daan was beaten, well and truly beaten. She had taken a minute helping of vegetables herself, but she is not spoiled. Oh no, too many vegetables in the evening make her constipated. Why on earth doesn't she keep her mouth shut about me? Then she wouldn't need to make such feeble excuses. It's gorgeous the way Mrs. Van Daan blushes. I don't. And that is just what she hates. Yours, Anne.